Yeah, so I'm in the Baker Lab in CITID, and we study antimicrobial resistance, AMR, which is maybe something that some of you are familiar with. And basically, that means that you have different microorganisms, in my case, bacteria, and you expose them to an antibiotic or antimicrobial, and they evade killing or bacteriostasis from that treatment. And basically, that's what it is on an individual scale. And then when you look at population level, you end up with a lot of these pan-resistant or superbug infections that we don't have any treatments for. So that's sort of the baseline against which I'm working. So we have obviously live in a very interconnected world, and by 2050, because of AMR, it's expected that there'll be at least 10 million deaths per year. This is the global breakdown of where that mortality will lie. And this is because we really have an unmitigated AMR crisis. So in different parts of the world, you can get antimicrobials over the counter. They're used freely in agriculture, in the environment. And because of that, we're seeing newer and newer ways of bacteria, specifically in my case, resisting different treatment modalities that we have. And we have fewer and fewer of those treatments available to give to patients who need them. Because of antimicrobials, things like surgery and chemotherapy have become standard of care. And if we continue to lose the broad array of antimicrobials that we have, we're going to have more and more deaths due to those routine procedures. And just to note as well that with these deaths, it's estimated that by 2050, the economic burden globally of AMR will be $100 trillion. So also a huge economic implication of these infections. So I specifically focus on Klebsiella, which maybe some of you haven't heard of before, understandably and luckily. But it's a pathogen that exists in the environment, on us, in us, and also in agriculture, and animals. And basically, it is a dominant cause of. Oh, should I do something about this? Okay. And basically, it is a primary cause of healthcare-associated infections. So that means that you go into a hospital environment for one of those procedures I just mentioned, and Klebsiella is in the environment, and then you get sick with Klebsiella. So the most common Klebsiella infection is due to a species named Klebsiella pneumoniae, which comes from pneumonia because it causes the most pneumonia. And it also causes a huge amount of neonatal sepsis. So because of that, it is the most fatal pathogen in children under 5 in low and low to middle income countries, which is a pretty big title to bear. Because Klebsiella has these different phenotypes, so it causes sepsis, it causes pneumonia, bloodstream infections, UTIs. It also has a huge amount of genetic diversity. So its core genome, the amount of genetic information that all Klebsiella isolates contain is very small. So it's only about 30% of the whole genome compared to other species where that core genome might be 60 or 70%. Klebsiella has a very narrow core genome, which means that it has a huge amount of genetic ability to develop new ways to evade antimicrobials. And because of that, a lot of mechanisms we see across many different species of bacteria are first spotted in Klebsiella. So if we can figure out what these bacteria are doing to evade antimicrobials in Klebsiella, we could possibly prevent that same evasion mechanism becoming successful in other bacteria. And unfortunately, because of all these things, we don't have any licensed therapeutics, vaccines, antibodies, antimicrobials specifically for Klebsiella. So the drugs we use to treat Klebsiella are all broad spectrum, which means that they work against theoretically work against many different bacteria. So they target different virulence factors that are present in a huge range of bacterial species. So with that in mind, I decided to work on something that's a bit different, that we don't have any approved antimicrobial peptides. But I thought it would be interesting to try and see if they could work against Klebsiella. So antimicrobial peptides are part of our innate immune system. So they're part of the way that our body reacts to pathogens. And they're theorized to have a low propensity to resistance onset because they're very specific. and they're part of the host immune defense. So we thought if we could engineer some antimicrobial peptides, we could try and mimic the natural host defense, but in a very specific Klebsiella way. And in other species of bacteria, ones that aren't as resistant as Klebsiella, we've seen improved efficacy and specificity in killing and suspending the growth of those bacteria. And this image here is just to show how this peptide works. So it basically punches a hole in the membrane of the bacteria. So with that in mind, I then looked at 10 different sepsis isolates that are from Klebsiella and wanted to first assess, is there innate resistance to these peptides in these isolates, because Klebsiella is innately resistant to quite a few antimicrobials. But basically in these 10 isolates, we saw that only 2 really had good susceptibility. So Klebsiella also causes biofilms, so it covers surfaces. So along the bottom, the diffusion zone, that's just looking at how well this compound P13-1 breaks up the diffusion zone. And then on the vertical axis, just looking at the MIC, which means in general, how in liquid culture, how many bacteria are actually surviving after exposure. So there were 2 isolates of interest, sepsis isolates. And one other thing that is quite common in the field is to try and look at whether a new antimicrobial can be paired with an old antimicrobial to try and increase the productivity of the older antimicrobial and try and preserve whatever efficacy is left. And so I looked at 3 commonly prescribed antimicrobials for Klebsiella, each of which has a different mechanism of action, and found that colistin, which is a polymyxin and also works against the cell membrane cell wall, works synergistically with P13-1. So that's the blue, like partial synergy, not fully synergistic. So I proceeded with that to try and see if together in combination, the peptide and colistin could actually increase killing of the bacteria. So this is just some time kill curve. So I wanted to see if when I put the cells together, whether with the peptide, we would see killing over a duration. And these have different virulence. So KC100 is slightly more drug resistant than KC004, which is the one on the left. So you can see there's a bit of an earlier rebound in the isolate on the right versus the one on the left, but we do still get some sustained killing, which is what we want to see. This is quite a common phenotype that we've also observed in other antimicrobials that are being prescribed. So it's not surprising that there's a rebound at 24 hours, or in this case, even 8 hours. But it is promising that we're seeing some sustained killing. So our group is quite interested also in the phenotype of bacteria. And so I wanted to see what impact the peptide was having on the shape of the cells, because that can also reveal a lot of information. So on the right, you see just these are the untreated isolates. They look like healthy, happy Klebsiella. But at 6 hours and 24 hours of treatment, so 2 times MIC is just a double of the dose of the peptide. What you can see is that some of the isolates are in these elongated shape and they can't divide, so they're in the cell suspended, bacteriostatic. So that's quite interesting. We didn't know that it had that phenotypic impact. But yeah, so clear phenotypic variation as well after exposure. So then I moved on and wanted to see how these peptides worked against Klebsiella that were infected in Galeria melanella. And this is a wax moth larvae that we commonly use in microbiology because you can do really high throughput experiments and screens, and they're easy to handle and maintain. They have an innate immune system like humans, and the virulence factors that work against humans also work against the Galeria in Klebsiella. And yeah, another way to supplement in vitro assays. So we hadn't previously looked at any of the Klebsiella isolates I was working with in Galeria, so we didn't know if even just the isolates were going to kill the Galeria at like any concentration. And I didn't know if the peptide would be toxic to the Galeria either, but fortunately it was not toxic. Yeah. So these are the worm pictures. I was talking to someone about this before. But basically I wanted to figure out the lethal dose 50, which means at which point half of the worms die or live. And basically on the left, you can see we've got infected worms with Klebsiella that weren't treated with the peptide. On the right, we have worms infected with Klebsiella that were treated with the peptide. And you can see there's a huge phenotypic difference. Worms are happy, worms are not happy. Yeah, so that's just to give you a sense of the phenotype I was observing. So then what I wanted to do is to see if I could shift this LD50, so the number of worms looking dead versus the number of worms looking alive, with peptide treatment and then peptide and colistin treatment. And that is what I did next. So basically, this is a Kaplan-Meier curve. And what you can see is across the bottom, this is over 96 hours. And then the vertical axis is the percentage alive. And what you can see is there's a huge drop at 24 hours and then a bigger drop again at 100. These are just the 2 time points I was reading out at. But you can see the dotted lines are the ones where there's treatment with the peptide. And then the solid line is where there's no treatment. And you can see there's a slight protection, especially for like the higher concentration of bacteria. There's quite significant protection when the Glaria are treated with the peptide. And this trend is mirrored in the other isolate as well. So this was really promising to us to see that in Glaria, you can see an increase in the LD50, the number of Glaria surviving Klebsiella infection after peptide treatment. And the same thing was also observed with the colistin as well. And I realized I included the wrong plot, but the same things observed with the colistin, and actually you see an even bigger increase in the LD50 when you add in colistin as well. So what we've shown here is that this peptide is effective against the Glaria and does work against these different Klebsiella isolates that are extensively drug resistant. We can use the Glaria to reproducibly screen Klebsiella therapeutics and can characterize the treatment and an infection of Klebsiella in this model as well. We saw a synergistic dynamic between colistin and the peptide. And now we'll be looking in a mirroring model based on this data to look at both pre-treated Klebsiella with broad spectrum agents, then treated with the peptide and colistin. So yeah, carrying on to mouse model studies next. Yeah, thank you.
No, oh no, this is questions.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
Yes, thank you. That was brilliant. Questions. We have time for a few questions. So let me start. This P13-1.
Yeah.
That's your little protein fragment.
Yeah.
That breaks through the cell
membranes.
wall. Yeah. That would presumably be fairly generically active against any sort of membrane.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't suffer from resistance. Is that?
Yeah. So the theory is that basically because it's specific to the carbohydrate structures of the membrane, then you're able to just specifically focus on the pathogen. Yeah.
And it isn't a therapy by itself.
Well, so I mean, I did try it, by itself, and it did work, but it was even slightly more effective in combination with the colistin, I think, because of that mechanism of action.
Right. There's a question there, and then one.
Hi.
Hello. Great talk. So can you basically maybe shed some? Yeah. So my question is basically, how did you select that peptide and like as the previous question also mentioned, like, okay, it breaks down cell wall, but what about like normal cell wall, like human cells? Is that specific?
Yeah, so the reason we picked this one is because it mimics one that in a larger screen that our collaborators did. I realize I have one more slide. We did this with a group at the University of Naples. Our collaborators they're chemists, and so they're experts, and so they have looked at a large range of different antimicrobial peptides that are naturally occurring, and so they wanted to make one that was mirroring what they saw in the human host defense, and so that was how they got the inspiration for how to build this one.
Yeah, and it doesn't react with human cells.
Yeah, that's what I've seen so far. I didn't include that data, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, cool. Thank you.
I haven't charged them yet.
Just a small thing to check.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That was really interesting. One of the barriers to developing new antimicrobials is that they're used for very short periods of time, you hope, and they need to be very specific to the infection that you're trying to treat. And so that it's difficult for manufacturing companies to make any money out of it. My question quickly is, do you need a different peptide for each different sort of bacterium or because that could make it more difficult?
Yeah, well, so that's sort of the way we've been operating now, right, is with broad spectrum antibiotics, and that doesn't always work very well and sometimes has really negative knock-on consequences. So the theory is with something more specific like these peptides, which perhaps you'd have to make specific to every species, so Klebsiella, Salmonella, Campylobacter, but you would actually end up getting a better return on your investment because in the long term, you wouldn't have as many people with, their good bacteria, like their good microbiome being affected by the broad spectrum agents. Yeah, but I mean, there will be manufacturing challenges, but that's inevitable, I think. Yeah.
Are these things easy to make?
Yeah, yeah. They're easier than some of the other things I'm working with, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And scalable.
I mean, and as scalable as anything is, yeah.
Right.
Cool.
Fantastic. Well, that was
Thank you.
perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Yes.